This video has been made with the purpose of education and awareness of real crimes, and there is no disrespect intended to anyone. This is to help promote truth and justice for anyone who has been a victim of crime. What I'm about to report is what I have researched online, and I will welcome any corrections should they be required. Hello there, Little Berry True Crime fans. This is Eri Berry here. Great to be back with another report. We've been very reaction heavy over the last few weeks, reacting to JCS, Denty and Shaz, who I absolutely love. And there is a bit of noise going on outside in the street, so hopefully that doesn't get picked up, but I don't want that to deter from what I'm doing here. Right now, as I'm saying this, I have 756 subscribers. I think that's absolutely insane. And I'm very close to the 4,000 per annum. Potentially, within a few months, this could become a business. Now, I really would appreciate your help to get there. If you're not a subscriber and you want to be, please do. And if you want to tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody about it, then please do. The wider people, know about this channel, the wider the audience will be. For this case, we're going to go to New Zealand, specifically Auckland, New Zealand, which is the biggest city in New Zealand to my knowledge, although the capital is actually Wellington. But Auckland, I think, is a lot more well known. So we're going to go to the Hillcrest North Shore area of Auckland. Christie Alexis Leslie Marceau was born on the 16th of April in 1993 to parents Brian and Tracy Marceau, who also had a daughter 6 years earlier called Heather. Heather and Christy could well have been twins from 6 years apart. They look so alike, and they were best of friends. Even though there was a 6-year gap between them, they loved each other dearly. Yet their personalities were very, very different. Heather was very sensible, quiet, and very, very, very much down to earth, whereas Christy was bright, bubbly, and loved life. She loved the outdoors, and her dream, her absolute dream, was to be an events management company director. She wanted her own events management company, and at the time of this case, she was studying towards that at the Auckland University of Technology. Christy was also seen by her parents as a miracle because after they had Heather, they tried to conceive again, and it took 6 years and several rounds of IVF before they finally had Christy. And Brian was just so besotted with his little daughter. They couldn't believe they finally had a complete family. Heather had grown up and moved out of the family home. Christy still lived at home while she was attending university at the age of 18. But going back a little bit, when she was a child, she was someone who didn't like to see people friendless and lonely. And a testament to her character is that she saw a boy in the playground once on his own and actually managed to find people to be friends with him. The mother of this boy was so impressed that she sent her thanks to the school to give to Christy, who hadn't actually told anyone what she'd done. It wasn't something she did for grandiosity or to show off. She genuinely wanted people to feel part of a team. And to be an events coordinator, to be an events manager, it's a big team effort as well as an effort to be upbeat all the time. And she had the right personality for that. Christie Marceau also did voluntary work with animals, and she took part in fundraising. So this was a huge part of her life. Her father, Brian, worked in Adelaide, Australia. He would fly out there for several weeks, come home for a week or two, and then fly back out to Australia. So he was biding his time between Australia and New Zealand, and it became that much of a strain that the family had decided within a few months to move to Australia, to move to Adelaide, and Christy wanted to go with her parents. She was going to transfer to an Australian university. It would be a fresh start in a new country. It was something she was really psyched about, and it meant the family could be together a lot more than they were. In her childhood, Christy attended the Willow Park Primary School in Hillcrest. She left in 2003. She attended ACG Parnell College. In September 2010, Christie Marceau was working at a North Shore supermarket, and around about the same time, a new person joined the team, 18-year-old Akshay Anand Chand. Akshay and Christie's paths had crossed many years earlier when they were at primary school together. They were in the same year, but they didn't really know one another. They didn't really bother with one another. So this was the first time in 7 years that they'd actually spoken to one another. Whilst working at the supermarket, they became kind of casual friends, acquaintances. But Akshay very quickly realised that Christy was the most open-minded, non-judgmental and understanding person he'd ever met. He felt he could really, really open up to her. Akshay Chand was originally born in Fiji, and at the age of 4, his family, which is his mother, his father, and his 2-year-old sister, moved to New Zealand. They were there for a few years, and then Akshay's father, whose name was Anand, the same as Akshay's middle name, decided that he wanted to pursue a degree in sociology, so they actually moved from New Zealand to Wales in the UK. They were there for about a year and a half, and Akshay remarked that this was the happiest years of his life. He absolutely loved being in Wales. But then after a little while, the family upped again, and this time they moved back to New Zealand, whereas Akshay Chand's father moved back to their native Fiji to pursue his career. I believe he was going to go back to New Zealand and rejoin his family, or they were going to rejoin him. The relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Chand dwindled, and they separated. Mrs. Chand worked as a nurse. She did everything she could to provide for her son and her daughter. Her daughter was doing really, really well. And Akshay, at first, he showed real promise because he was so smart, really gifted academically. He was going places. He was top of the class, super intelligent. He had a bright future ahead of him until he was around 16. His grades started to fall, and they didn't just fall, they plummeted. They went through the floor to the point that Akshay didn't even graduate school. He dropped out when he was around 17 and spent most of his time in his room. He was depressed, essentially. He felt his life was worthless. He felt that this life was just not for him. He was probably destined for bigger and better things, but nothing that academia could give him. He spent a lot of time on video games, and he alienated a lot of his friends, being very quiet, very subdued. And his mother, she was very frustrated with her son. She wanted him to either go back to studying or get a job. And this was how Akshay got the job in the supermarket, because of his mother's insistence, but also because his aunt worked at the supermarket, so she got him the job on the meat counter there. It was there that he met Christie Marceau. Akshay's relationship with his mother was very strained. He didn't really get on well with his sister that much, and he had barely spoken to his father since his father left for Fiji when he was about 9 or 10 years old. Occasionally his father would phone, but Akshay very rarely wanted to talk to him, so it's safe to say that he felt kind of abandoned by his father. His mother worked a lot of hours, so he felt that she didn't really give him a lot of time. But if you're a single person bringing up 2 kids, you are going to need to work quite a bit. And Akshay didn't seem to be wanting to try and help himself. But with Christy, Akshay felt that he could really confide in her. He could open up to her in a way that he could never with anyone before. He was awkward around women. He was awkward socially anyway. And his relationship with his mother was very strained. But for some reason, Christy, above anyone else, he felt that she was the one person who could truly understand him. Akshay's depression had been looming for a couple of years, but the more he talked to Christy about this, it became apparent to Christy that she was kind of not just his sounding board, like she was the kind ear that he needed and that he wanted, but he didn't seem to be receptive to advice, suggestions of help. He seemed to just want to talk constantly about what was bothering him without finding solution. Akshay Chand had several obsessions, one of which was capitalism, how much he despised it. He said that capitalism was responsible for breaking up his family. Christy was happy to listen, but he became very intense, very demanding, to the point that he would hound her on Facebook. He followed her home once from a works do. He would wait for her at her home until she got home from either university or going out to the shops. He would stay at the house way beyond his welcome time. And Tracy, Christy's mum, something about him was rather odd. She didn't know what it was, but she said to Christy that there's just something off about him. I really don't want you to be friends with anymore. I don't really want him around. Now, there was a bit of a problem there, and that was Akshay Chand and Christie Marceau lived very close to each other. As the crow flies, their houses were 300 to 350 meters apart. They were separated by a reserve, so a patch of green. Driving, so as the car drives, about 1 kilometer. So it was quicker walking than it was driving. Akshay Chand lived in an apartment and Christie Marceau lived in a duplex. So basically it was an upper masonette and a basement flat. And in the basement flat was Tracy's mother, Christie's grandmother, Shirley. How it was set up was a bit strange, that the second floor, or the middle floor, was where the front door was, and that was on a hill, and the basement floor was where the garden would be at the very back. At one point, Akshay had written a love letter to Christy, and he actually said he was in love with her. Christy wasn't interested in him like this. He went on and on about how he wanted her to be his full-time counsellor. So he wanted her to dedicate her life to him, not only romantically, but just be his constant companion, be his counsellor for life. In June 2011, Christy quit her job at the supermarket and got a job in a cheese shop. Akshay found out about this, and the very day that Christy quit, he quit. He said there was no point in him being there if Christy wasn't there, so it was only Christy keeping him there, not the income, not that his mother wanted him to do something with his time in life, purely Christy. So he went back to what he did before. No motivation, no ambition, he just lived for Christy. He would stalk her. He would follow her around. This became a bit too much for her, and she was so kind and so generous to him that she didn't really want to tell him to go away, but at the same time it was getting a bit much. Another thing Akshay did which was strange is that he gave Christy some money. Now when I say gave her money, I mean he insisted so much that even though Christy wasn't someone who wanted money from anybody, she took it from him because he was so insistent. But she held on to it because she had a feeling, given Akshay's tendency to change his mind so frequently, that he would decide that he didn't want her to have the money in the end and say he wanted it back. And lo and behold, he did. So this was the kind of mood swings and behavior that Christy had started to notice with Akshay. After quite some time with no contact, Akshay Chand called Christie Marceau at around 10 a.m. on the 6th of September 2011. Christy was in bed, having a lie-in. She heard her phone go. At first, she didn't quite get to it in time and it went to voicemail. She left it. But then it went again. Akshay said something to Christy that would make her hastily get out of bed, put on a top and jumper and tracksuit bottoms and grab her keys, and she drove hastily to Akshay's flat. Akshay had told Christy that he had crushed up a bottle of pills into a glass of water, and if she didn't arrive in 10 minutes, he was going to drink it. This was a suicide threat. Christy arrived at Akshay's home and immediately knew that he was alone. His mother was at work, his sister was at school. She saw on a table there was some powder, so she could tell that he had actually made good on his threat. He had crushed up some tablets, but she couldn't see the drink anywhere, and she asked him, "Where is the drink?" He said to her, "Do you think I'm stupid? I hid it because I knew you'd find it." They sat down and began to talk, and Akshay started to talk to Christy as he usually would do. He would change topics rapidly, talking about capitalism. It was very, very difficult to understand what points he was making, but he was clearly very, very depressed. She tried very much to understand where this was coming from. Akshay then revealed to Christy that he had 3 plans for the day, but didn't say at first what they were. Christy then begged Akshay to get some professional help, and when she did, he became angry and accused her of being a bad friend, only being there for him when he really needed her, not at any other time. She only contacted him when he contacted her. Christy tried to implore him that she'd been busy, she started a new job, she was at university. He didn't accept this. Akshay said to her, "Let's face it, we both know you haven't been busy." Christy once again said to Akshay that he needed professional help. And I think this is something she probably had told him many times before, and he had either refused or tried and failed to get professional help. Akshay reiterated that he wanted Christy to be his full-time counsellor, even though she had no qualifications and no training in this field. Christy very politely said to him, "Look, I can't do that. I'm not the right person for that." Also, Akshay wasn't a priority in Christy's life, really. He was a casual friend, but she had many other things in her life that she wanted to do, and she did want to move away to Australia. And I believe Akshay knew about that, and he felt that she was trying to avoid him, that her move to Australia was somehow about trying to get away from him. Then Akshay said a few things that were very odd. He said he had cervical cancer. Now, when Christy said to him, you can't have cervical cancer, you don't have a cervix. He then changed it and said, oh, he had prostate cancer. Now, him changing his mind about that and saying, first of all, cervical cancer, then to prostate cancer, prompted Christy to think, he's lying. This isn't true. And she took this kind of thing very, very seriously. She believed he'd gone too far. And she told him again, this isn't right. You shouldn't be doing this. Akshay's demeanor changed. He went from being angry to being furious and rageful. He stood up, he towered over Christy, and out from the back of his trousers, he drew a very sharp kitchen knife. It had clearly been sharpened. It was gleaming. It was around 20 centimeters long, and he was brandishing it at Christy. He said, "Don't scream or I will knife you." Christy cried loudly, trying to get the attention of the people in the next apartment. She could hear them and was hoping if they could hear her crying that they would do something. Akshay told her to keep quiet, and he sat back down, holding the weapon aimed at her. Before he sat down though, he noticed that Christy was holding her phone, as if she was going to use it to text somebody. So he demanded she hand it over, which she refused to do, but eventually he wrestled it from her grip. Akshay then reminded Christy he had 3 things that he wanted to do that day. He then revealed what they were. He wanted to scare Christy, have revenge on Christy, and then kill himself. He then demanded that she take off her jumper, which she did. He then demanded that she take off her top and her tracksuit bottoms, which she at first refused to do, but he insisted, saying, "You know what will happen if you don't." So standing there in her underwear, she must have felt so exposed and so vulnerable. He was still holding the knife, threatening her, and he went on again about all the problems, capitalism. He was using words that were not right in context. He then started talking about the devil and that the devil had possessed him. There was this battle of wills going on between him and the devil was winning. Christy continued to cry loudly, again trying to get the attention of the neighbours. Akshay told her to compose herself, still threatening her with a knife. He accused her again of being a bad friend, and what she had done that day was too little, too late. Christy then decided to change tack. She agreed with Akshay. She had been a bad friend. She apologised to him. Akshay then reminded Christy for the 3rd time of his plans that day. And when he said that he wanted to exact revenge, Christy then asked him a question. "Are you going to kill me?" Akshay said no. He wasn't going to kill her. He wanted to rape her. Standing there in her underwear, Christy began to cry loudly again, and once again, Akshay got very agitated, told her to calm down. But after a few moments of this, he somehow snapped out of it and said that she could go. He picked up her clothes, given them back to her. She got dressed very hastily. Akshay put the knife down to show Christy that he was serious, because she did say to him, "How do I know you're not just going to knife me in the back as I run out of here?" She also said that she contemplated saying to Akshay, "Just stab me," at least once, hoping that by realising what he'd done, it would snap him out of it. But her constant crying did appear to snap him out of it, and she did manage to get out of the flat. She ran down the hallway of the apartment building. She ran out the door into her car. She was crying her eyes out. She drove home, and at home was Shirley, her grandmother. Her mother Tracy was at work, and when Shirley saw her granddaughter, she knew something was really, really wrong, and Christy told her everything. Shirley then called Tracy at work saying, "Love, you need to come home now. Christy has been attacked." The 2 women took Tracy to the police station, where she filed a complaint against Akshay Chand. Christy relayed this whole story to them, saying that in this period of time she was in there, around 35 minutes, as to what had actually happened, what Akshay had said to her. Even though when he was going to let her go, he said that he wanted to kill himself again, and she still tried to talk him out of it. And Akshay did actually do what he said he was going to do. He did consume the drink that he'd made, which turned out to be 50 crushed multivitamins. He'd read somewhere that taking a huge overdose of multivitamins could be toxic on the body and therefore fatal. So it was a genuine attempt on his own life. But when his sister came home from school, he was still conscious and asked his sister to call an ambulance for him. And at the hospital, he was seen by a psychiatrist because, of course, a suicide attempt, you do need to be evaluated. They can't just let you go when you're physically okay. They need to assess you psychologically. The police were very supportive of Christy. They realised how terrified she was of this boy. He was unhinged. And what was also very concerning was that Akshay had never broken the law before. He'd never been arrested, never been in trouble. So at the age of 18, to go from having no problems whatsoever, maybe just, dropping out of school and being a bit lazy, to kidnapping someone, threatening to rape and knife them. The psychiatrist who assessed Akshay before anyone at the hospital became aware of what happened to Christy and Akshay's part in it, diagnosed him with depression. It was clear he'd been depressed for a long time and he was prescribed antidepressants. It was also revealed that he felt alone, isolated, he had insomnia, he had problems with his eating, his weight would go up and down. But when he spoke to the psychiatrist, he didn't mention Christy at all, let alone what had happened that day. What was also noted on Akshay's medical records was something that the psychiatrist mentioned, as well as the depression, some grandiose or entitled flavour to his discussion, also slightly narcissistic. The police found Akshay at the hospital and they questioned him. He admitted to everything, answering every question with yeah or yes. Most of his answers were just one word, and his effect was very flat. He didn't seem to have much emotion going on at all. He agreed he had kidnapped Christy, essentially. He had threatened to rape her. He had threatened to assault her. He was taken to the police station and arrested, and he was kept in custody until his initial hearing. Akshay also, as well as being open and honest with the police and admitting to everything he'd done, everything that Christy said he did, he also told the police that he still felt anger and resentment towards Christy, and he still wanted revenge. This wasn't something that had gone and he wouldn't do again. He was actively saying he wanted revenge on Christy. But what that revenge looked like, he wouldn't say. The police did not want Akshay to get bail. They had this feeling that his behaviour would become uncontrollable and unpredictable. If somebody goes from being completely law-abiding to doing this, imagine what they can be capable of. And Christy even wrote a letter to the court to say she did not want Akshay to get bail. She was terrified of him. Akshay's own sister was scared of him as well, and she had to live with him. The police filed their papers to oppose bail, but the law in New Zealand at the time was that anyone between the age of 17 and 20, if they didn't have any prior convictions, they met the requirements for bail. But the judge was on the police's side. They thought, I can't do this. I need more information. So they ordered, on the very same day as the initial hearing, which was a few days after the incident, a full psychiatric assessment which was carried out. The judge also wanted Akshay to stay at a mental health facility, but he didn't meet the criteria for that. Christy had also become agoraphobic. She was terrified for her life, to the point that even inside her own home, she couldn't sleep in her own bedroom anymore. She could only sleep in the room with her mum. And if she heard any noises, she always had to ask somebody to check it out for her. She didn't want to leave the house. Given Akshay's age and his lack of priors, well, when I say lack, no priors whatsoever, he was entitled to bail. So another judge did ultimately grant bail on the 5th of October 2011, but on the proviso that he stay at home at all times, leaving only with an escort to attend any legal appointments or any medical appointments. His mother and his sister were going to supervise him. Now, I'm sorry, but his mother worked a lot of hours. She was a nurse. His sister was 16 and she had to go to school. He couldn't be watched all the time. But the police did say that they would be watching the house. They would make unannounced visits at random times. And they did. Over a period of a month, they made 23 unannounced visits, and Akshay Chand was at home every single time. He appeared to be complying with all the terms of his bail. His mother, though, was very cautious of him, so she hid all of the kitchen knives so he couldn't get to them. I think she was worried that he might turn on his own family. Christy was still scared, but she tried very much to get on with her life. And when he met bail, she was terrified all over again. Now, the first judge was very much aware of how close their houses were, but the second judge said, well, if he stays at the home and he's not allowed any contact with Christy whatsoever, this should be acceptable. So after a few weeks, as I said, the police made these random checks, and Christy slowly started to relax. She was excited about moving to Australia. She was talking very passionately about the future and looking forward to this new life. And on the 6th of November 2011, Christy and Tracy went searching around for the best place in town to get pancakes for breakfast. They had a wonderful breakfast together. Christy went and met a friend later that day and went to the zoo. It was a very, very happy day. The very next day, which was a Monday, would have been a normal working day for both women. Christy was due to go to her work for an afternoon shift. Tracy started work quite early, so she was up and ready by 7 a.m. in that morning. The doorbell rang. Now, 7 o'clock in the morning is pretty early for anyone to call, really, but Tracy didn't think much of this because Christy was an avid online shopper. She would order packages from Amazon, like I think a lot of us do now, and these would arrive usually at around 7 a.m. So thinking it was another package, Christy opened the door. The door was actually at the top of a flight of stairs, and when she climbed the stairs and opened the door, she saw a young man there who at first she didn't quite recognise. Then Tracy saw that the man standing in front of her was holding a knife in his right hand. Tracy knew she was staring right at Akshay Chand. Tracy attempted to shut the door, but Akshay pushed it against her, brandishing the knife at her, demanding to know who was home. Tracy told him that her husband was home, but Akshay knew that Brian was actually in Australia. He'd been watching the family for some time. He had assessed their routine. He knew they were taking in packages that early, so he knew they would open the door that morning. He pushed open the door, and Tracy screamed loudly enough that Christy would hear him. She ran up the stairs and saw Akshay Chand. Akshay rushed at her, kicked her in the chest, and sent her tumbling down the stairs. Akshay went after her. Christy got to her feet, stumbled a few more times before getting to the bottom of the stairs, and headed for her grandmother's basement flat. Tracy got on the phone to the police straight away. She was on the phone scarcely for a minute when she heard a scream. The scream was coming from the basement flat, more specifically the garden of the basement flat. She had thought that Christy would get to the basement flat and lock the door behind her and she would be safe from Akshay. But she wasn't. Akshay was in hot pursuit of Christy. He had come up behind her as she was trying to get out of the gate of the back garden, and he had stabbed her in the back of the neck. He'd repeatedly stabbed her in the back, with full force to the point that this knife was bent at a 90-degree angle. Christy fell to the floor, and by the time Tracy got to her daughter, Christy had just a few seconds left to look at her mother and hear the words of her mother say, "I love you." And Tracy described how the light went out in her daughter's eyes. She saw Akshay Chand standing there. Now, some reports say he was holding the knife, some say it was on the floor, but either way, he had used it with such force that the knife, as I said, was bent at a 90-degree angle. Tracy screamed at him, "You've killed my little girl." Akshay said, "I am glad." The police were already on their way, and by the time they arrived, Christy was beyond saving. She had died from profusive blood loss, and it was found from her autopsy that initial stab to the back of the neck, which was more towards the base of her head, would have been so devastating on her spinal cord that it would have severed her nerves. She wouldn't have felt much after that, and she certainly wouldn't have been able to fight back or get away. When the police asked, "Why did you do this?" Akshay looked at them and said, "Reprisal." His hands were shaking, and when they asked, "Why are your hands shaking?" he said, "It's not easy to kill someone, is it?" He then asked if he could put his earphones in and carry on listening to a song that he'd been listening to while he was on the way there, which was eerily about the situation he was in with Christy. Christy was 18 years old, barely starting her life, and she was killed by another 18-year-old who, by all accounts, was also starting his life. She had been the only one really in his life to lend him a kind ear, and yet he was heavily critical of her. When he initially kidnapped her, and there was this whole debate about bail, he had actually written the letter saying that he was sorry, but also not. Still blaming Christy. I'm not even going to read what he wrote because I think it's disgusting. He was blaming Christy completely. And after he killed Christy, Akshay Chand showed no remorse whatsoever. Akshay Chand was diagnosed with having paranoid schizophrenia to the point that they said he may never recover. He was so young to develop this condition, to go from being fairly functional and okay really, to the age of 16 going on a downward spiral. There was also a possibility of there being a genetic factor. There were some mental illnesses that ran in the male line in the Chand family, so this could be a factor too. Akshay Chand was raising red flags all over the place, saying he needed help. Christy was the only one who really helped him, but even she could only do so much. If you try your best to help somebody and they're not willing to accept that help, or they're not willing to look for a solution and focus on the problem, there's very little you can do. And I believe Christy didn't make too much contact with Akshay because it would have been draining on her emotions and resources too. There are people in Akshay's life who failed him, but more importantly, Christy was failed big time. She was failed by the New Zealand justice system. She was failed by the police, who promised the Marceaus they would keep them safe, and they didn't. They should have been monitored around the clock. Akshay should have been supervised around the clock. Or better still, he should have been kept in remand. Or on electronic tag, because then they would have known when he left the house. You can't leave it to a 16-year-old to watch her brother, of whom she's already scared. A mother who's working, who has to keep working. They needed more help than this. The Marceaus needed protection. And Tracy Marceau herself deals with huge amount of guilt, saying that she should have pursued Akshay Chand as he ran after Christy rather than calling the police. But even she said there's no way she could have overpowered him. He was very strong. She probably wouldn't have been able to catch up to him. And she's also feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of PTSD because she's the one who opened the door, and she feels that she should have known better or checked who was there. She also said something very powerful, which was there was more than one hand on the knife that day. Christy could have been saved. Her death was needless. Absolutely needless. The Marceaus also had to learn that Akshay had actually been acquitted of murder on grounds of insanity, so he was found to be not criminally responsible for his actions, which the Marceaus did not believe for one second. They felt that Akshay was in his right mind. He knew what he was doing. He knew right from wrong. But I believe they were given some more papers and some more information about what Akshay was going through, what his symptoms were, and then they began to understand and believe that this is a case of someone with a very serious mental health condition. Akshay was found guilty of kidnap and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for that, but after his acquittal of the murder charge, he was found to be such a danger to the public and that he may never recover, so he was committed to a facility, an institution, and will remain there for the rest of his life. And I think that is the right thing. If he could do this, if he could escalate in such, go against the terms of his bail and just go to the house of the person that he's stalking, push his way in and kill them, what else could he do? The Marceaus wanted Christy's life to mean something, so they worked tirelessly to try and institute tighter bail rules in New Zealand, and they did, Christy's law. So if anything like this were to happen again, people would be protected. It is too late for the little girl. It's not going to make a difference to their lives, but this happens a lot. Families of murder victims will often find loopholes, gaps, or blind spots in the law that need to be closed, that need to be tightened up so that people don't suffer. They don't do it for their good. they do it for the good of other people. And I think that's a real testament to the characters of people who have lost loved ones to crime. They also set up the Christie Marceau Charitable Trust, which provides scholarships for people to go to somewhere called Outward Bound, which is an outdoor activity facility. And this was something that Christy loved to do. She loved the outdoors. And if you've ever been to New Zealand, it is very, very big and rural, lots of rapids and white water rafting, that kind of thing. It just looks amazing. The Marceaus have really not let Christie's memory die. She was such a bright, shining star, and they said that they wanted the world to be a happier place in her memory, because that was what she wanted. To be an events coordinator, to create this event, you do it for people's enjoyment. And that is exactly who she was. I am so sorry. This case is just, it makes me so angry when people are failed like this. The justice system, the police, they're all there to protect you. And if somebody lives 350 meters away from you and they're threatening you, they are unhinged, they are unpredictable, you need more protection than that. And Christy, bless her, she was trying to get on with her life. She didn't want to be a prisoner herself. She could have opted to have stayed at home, but he could have turned up any time. Akshay also admitted that he bided his time before going to the house because he wanted Christy to feel safe before he finally went ahead and killed her. I'm so pleased that he's going to be detained indefinitely. I do think there is an element of him that is criminally responsible, but on the whole, he couldn't be found to be criminally responsible because of his mental health condition. But also, if he had been convicted of murder, he probably would have got paroled, but he really is such a huge danger. He does need to be kept under supervision for the rest of his life, and I'm glad that he will be. If it were this country, he probably would be put in Broadmoor or somewhere like that. When it comes to mental health, if there are red flags that are being raised by somebody, don't ignore them. It's not just a case of buck up your ideas and get on with it. It could be the symptom of something a lot more sinister, something where they could really harm themselves or harm other people. It's something that we should all not just talk about, but take action on and understand that about other people. Be able to see red flags that people might be raising without them actually explicitly saying it. Please take care of yourselves, my little berries. I adore you all, and I do wish you all the very best. If you've got a case suggestion, please put it in the comments below. Please leave me a comment. I love chatting to all of you. So thank you once again. Bye-bye.